of language and our myths about it and its evolution and its potential future evolution. So and this is in my personal life the great mystery to me, because I feel that my intellectual style is that of a scientist, and I take very seriously science, and yet not only my faith, but my experience has led me to believe that the world is not a construction of space and time and matter and energy, that mapping is insufficient, that the world is instead some kind of a linguistic construct. It is more in the nature of a sentence or a novel or a work of art than it is in the nature of these machine models of interlocking law that we inherit out of 1,000 years of rational reductionism. The world only behaves as science says it should when we confine our engagement with it to information that is at a great distance from us, like reading the New York Times every day. If you read the New York Times every day, few miracles will occur while you are engaged in that activity. Essentially what is happening is you are getting your cultural programming for the day. All your switches, if any need to be reset by cultural values, are reset at that point. But when we recede into what I call the primacy of immediate experience, the rules and models that we've been handed by science and what's called common sense are just totally found to be inadequate. And I don't mean when we perturb ordinary consciousness with psychedelic drugs. I'll speak about that in a moment. But I simply mean when we go into solitude, when we go into wilderness, when we endure great travail in our lives, or when we put ourselves in extraordinary alien circumstances, then it's as though the membrane between the ego and something else, which we could call our guardian angel, or the Jungian unconscious, or the overmind, something like that, the membrane grows thin, and the world loses its, its mundane character. And instead, things previously mundane begin to become charged with psychic energy. They become carriers of meaning. They become carriers of meaning. This is very peculiar. At a low level, it's not so astonishing. It's a kind of generalized opening to the world, because everything is imbued with significance. That tree, that person, that greeting, that conversation is imbued with a kind of depth and significance that is satisfying. It's like living deeply. But this phenomenon can proceed to a deeper level of introspection and relationship to the exterior. And in that case then, this significance, which everything was previously seen to have, begins to compress or densify, and the world begins to dissolve into animate intelligence. Now, at this point, if you didn't bargain for this, you're probably very concerned about your mental condition. And if you aren't, your friends are. Because what you're saying at this point is, the rivers talk to me, the trees whisper in my ear. What you're recovering is the meaning That's all. The meaning that is self-evident in nature, but that we block. The meaning is so pregnant in everything that it can actually articulate itself in your native English tongue. And, talking rocks, talking trees, talking boulders, we define this as pathology. It means, in technical jargon, a severely diminished ego is in danger of overwhelmment by material from the inchoate and disorganized unconscious. Well, but what's actually happening is that for the first time in somebody's life or experience, they are meeting the resident meaning in reality with its force, unblunted by conditioning and denial. And this is some kind of a linguistic process. We and all nature, I think, swims in some kind of sea of signification, of which we are, in the same way that the amphibians were able to drag themselves out of the primitive oceans of this planet into air and exist in a completely different dimension. We, whether grandly or perversely, the verdict is not yet in, we dragged ourselves out of the sea of telepathic, interconnected signification that united all life, and we exist panting and pop-eyed in this other dimension called history, ego awareness, presence of self, sense of loss, anticipation of gain. All of these dimensions of experience really have been added to what was previously the animal Tao, just the howling at the moon Tao of animal existence. And to this we have added, a dimension of future anticipation, a dimension of regret, a dimension of how do I make choices, and so forth and so on. There is not I don't put a moral judgment on this, but it has to be said that in the tradition of the West, this has been viewed classically as the fall. This is the fall into names instead of realities, into constructs of reality rather than reality itself. And this has now been inculcated into each and every one of us as, both the glory and the trauma of human existence, which is our extraordinary ability to reside in and be in language. So, for instance, I've made this example before. A child lying in a crib and a hummingbird comes into the room, and the child is ecstatic because this shimmering iridescence of movement and sound and attention, it's just wonderful. I mean, it is an instantaneous miracle when placed against the background of the dull wallpaper of the nursery and so forth. But then mother or nanny or someone comes in and says, "It's a bird, baby. Bird, bird." And this takes this linguistic piece of mosaic tile and places it over the miracle and glues it down with the epoxy of syntactical momentum. And from now on, the miracle is confined within the meaning of the word. And by the time a child is 4 or 5 or 6, no light shines through. They have tiled over every aspect of reality with a linguistic association that blunts it, limits it, and confines it within cultural expectation. But this doesn't mean that this world of signification is not outside, still existent, beyond the horizons, the foreshortened horizons of a culturally validated language. Well, so then classically the path through this has been through use of psychedelic plants or some form of ascetic practice or fasting or prayer and meditation, whatever, some way of breaking through. And it is literally presented as a breaking through, a penetration to another level, that culture is an imprisoning bubble of interlocking assumptions that are like a collective hallucination. I mean, I hate to say it because it's a recursive metaphor, but culture is like a delusion of some sort, because it isn't true, of course. It isn't true if you're a Witoto. It isn't true that you came from the piss of the anaconda god when he had to get out of his canoe at the first waterfall. That's not really true, but that's your cultural myth, and you live inside it. Our cultural myths, that the world is made of things called mu mesons and antiprotons, is of course not true either. But it's a linguistic construct that we culturally validate and live inside.